The night was silent, but her heart pounded like a war drum. She stood at the edge of the balcony, staring out at the vast empire she once only dreamed of touching. The city stretched before her, golden lights flickering in the distance, the air thick with the scent of burning lanterns and the faintest whispers of music from the streets below. This was the world he had promised her, the world they were supposed to rule together. But now she stood alone. She had risked everything for love, walked away from the life she had known, betrayed the people who had once called her their own, and followed him into a world that had never been meant for her. It had been a whirlwind of stolen glances, whispered promises in darkened halls, and nights spent planning a future that felt impossible. He had told her they would change everything together, that love was stronger than blood, that the empire would bow, not just to him, but to them both. And for a time, she had believed it. She remembered the moment she first saw him, how he had carried himself with an effortless confidence, how his words had felt like poetry, disguised as politics. He had been everything she was warned against, a man of power wrapped in charm, someone who could shape the course of history with just a single decision. And yet, she had chosen him. Not because of his crown, not because of the empire at his feet, but because for the first time in her life, she had felt seen. The court had whispered when they saw them together. She was an outsider, a woman with no claim to power, no bloodline that connected her to the throne. She had heard the rumors, the sharp words spoken behind her back, the warnings that she was nothing more than a distraction, that he would never truly choose her when it mattered. But he had sworn otherwise. He had told her that love was stronger than tradition, that he would tear down the walls of the empire if it meant keeping her by his side. But love was never simple. The night everything changed had started like any other. A grand hall filled with noble faces, the air buzzing with quiet negotiations, the weight of power shifting from one hand to another with every carefully chosen word. She had stood beside him, her fingers wrapped around his arm, feeling the steady beat of his pulse beneath her touch. It had been a show of strength, her presence at his side, the silent defiance against those who believed she had no place there. And then, the doors had burst open. The message had been simple, delivered in hurried breaths and shaking hands. A betrayal, a threat, moving closer. He had turned to her, his expression unreadable, and in that moment, she had seen something in his eyes that sent ice through her veins. Doubt. Not in himself, not in the empire. Doubt in her. She had not spoken as he stepped away, as the weight of the moment settled between them like an unspoken truth. For the first time, she had felt the distance growing, the unbreakable bond they had fought so hard for beginning to fray at the edges. And then, just like that, he was gone. She had waited, hours that stretched into eternity, but he never returned. And when she finally found the courage to search for him, to demand answers, the truth had already been decided for her. He had left not just the palace, but everything. The empire, the crown, the love he had sworn would defy the odds. She had risked everything for him. And in the end, he had walked away without a word. Now, standing at the edge of the balcony, the empire at her feet, she understood the cruelest truth of all. This world had never been meant for her, but it was hers now, and she would not let it fall. The wind swept through the balcony, carrying the distant sounds of the city below. She gripped the railing, the cool metal grounding her, as she tried to steady the storm inside her. The empire had been his, built by his ancestors, ruled by his bloodline, but now it was hers. Not by choice, not by ambition, but by necessity. She turned, stepping back into the grand chamber that had once felt like a foreign world to her. The walls were lined with gold, intricate carvings, telling stories of past rulers, men who had shaped the empire through war, alliances, and betrayals. Now, their gazes seemed to follow her, as if judging whether she was worthy of standing here. But what did it mean to be worthy? She had never wanted a crown, Power had been his burden, not hers. She had been willing to stand beside him, to fight for their place together, to challenge the traditions that had bound him to a life he claimed he never wanted. But he had left. And now, she was the only one left to face the chaos he had abandoned. The council had been restless since his disappearance. They had gathered in secret, whispering behind closed doors, trying to decide what came next. They had tolerated her when she was only the woman he loved. Now, they saw her as a problem that needed solving. She had been warned not to attend the meeting, that she would not be welcome. But she had learned long ago that fear had no place in survival. So when she stepped into the council chamber, the room fell silent. Eyes turned to her, some filled with open disdain, others carefully masking their thoughts. An older man, one of the longest-serving advisors, cleared his throat. "This is not your place," he said, his tone measured but firm. "The empire needs leadership, not sentiment." She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "And who will lead it?" she asked you. A murmur rippled through the room. No one had dared question the council before, not openly. But she was not like the others who had stood before them. She had not been raised in these halls, bound by their traditions. She had fought for every space she occupied, and she would not surrender this one. "The empire was never meant to be ruled by someone like you," another voice said, a younger noble who had always made his disapproval of her clear. She tilted her head slightly. "And yet, here we are." Silence. She had spent years being underestimated. They had called her a distraction, a passing indulgence. But now, she was the only thing standing between them and the collapse of everything they claimed to protect. The war brewing beyond the capital's walls would not wait for them to decide whether she belonged. The nobles were restless, the generals uncertain. And in the shadows, whispers of betrayal grew louder. If she did not act now, the empire would devour itself before anyone could claim the throne. She turned to leave, but before stepping through the door, she paused. "You can fight over the past all you want," she said, "but I'm the only one looking toward the future." The door closed behind her, and the weight of the empire pressed against her shoulders. She had never wanted this power, but she would not let it be stolen from her now. She walked through the dimly lit corridors of the palace, her footsteps steady, her mind a battlefield of unanswered questions. The walls felt taller now, the shadows deeper, as if the empire itself was watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. She had spent so much time believing she was fighting for love, only to be left with a throne that had never been meant for her. But if they thought she would break, they were mistaken. The council would try to strip her of any influence. She knew that much. They were men who had spent their lives shaping the empire to fit their desires, twisting laws to serve their own ambitions. To them, she was an inconvenience, a problem they had not foreseen. But they underestimated her. She had spent years surviving in a world that had never been meant to welcome her. And survival had taught her one thing: power did not belong to those who inherited it. Power belonged to those who were willing to take it. As she entered the grand hall, she saw the faces of the nobles gathered in quiet discussion. Some turned away at the sight of her. Others watched her with thinly veiled contempt. But one gaze stood out: a man in dark robes seated near the edge of the room, his expression unreadable. He was not part of the council. He was something else entirely. She had heard whispers of him before. A strategist. A man who did not fight battles with swords, but with words and deception. Some said he had once been closer to the throne than anyone realized. Others claimed he was merely an opportunist, waiting for the right moment to shift his allegiance. Either way, she could feel his interest in her, and that made him dangerous. "You look tired," he said as she approached, his voice calm, almost amused. She did not flinch. "You look comfortable, sitting in a room where you hold no official power." He smiled at that, tilting his head slightly. "Official power is an illusion. Influence, however, is real." She studied him carefully. "And what do you want?" He leaned forward slightly, his expression still unreadable. "To see what kind of ruler you intend to be." The words lingered between them. She could feel the weight of the unspoken challenge. He was not offering loyalty. Not yet. He was waiting to see if she was worth aligning with, or if she would crumble like so many before her. Before she could respond, the doors to the hall swung open, and a messenger rushed inside, breathless. "The northern border," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "It's under attack." A ripple of shock moved through the room. The council members exchanged glances, some already whispering among themselves. But she did not hesitate. "Summon the generals," she said, her voice sharp, decisive. "We ride at dawn." The room fell silent at her command. Some looked at her in disbelief, others in barely concealed disdain. The council had expected her to fade into the background, to let them handle the crisis while they slowly erased her from the throne. But she had no intention of being erased. As she turned to leave, the strategist's voice followed her, "Be careful." He murmured, "Not every war is fought on the battlefield." She did not stop walking, but his words stayed with her, because deep down, she knew he was right. This was not just about the attack on the border. It was about power, about control, and the real war was only just beginning. The journey to the northern border was relentless. Cold winds howled through the mountains, carrying whispers of a war that had already begun. She rode at the front, her cloak billowing behind her, refusing to let exhaustion slow her down. Every mile brought new reports: villages burned, soldiers scattered, an enemy force moving faster than anyone had predicted. But it wasn't just the invasion that troubled her. It was the silence from the capital. The council had sent no word. No reinforcements. No confirmation of their support. It was as if they were waiting for her to fail. She clenched her jaw, gripping the reins tighter. Let them wait. Let them scheme. She had not come this far to be undone by men who spoke in circles while others bled for their power. The strategist rode beside her, watching the road ahead with his usual unreadable expression. He had not questioned her decision to lead the army herself. If anything, she sensed he had expected it. "They will test you," he said after a long stretch of silence. "Not just on the battlefield, but in the moments before it. That is when true rulers are made or broken." She did not look at him. "Then let them test me." By the time they reached the outpost, the air was thick with smoke. Fires still smoldered in the ruins of what had once been a thriving town. Bodies lay in the streets, soldiers moving among them, checking for any sign of survivors. The enemy had not just attacked, they had sent a message. A commander approached, his armor streaked with blood and dust. "We were overrun," he said, his voice strained. "They came in waves, faster than we could hold them back. Our scouts say they've taken the valley. If they reach the capital, it's over." She dismounted, taking in the destruction around her. Fear was an easy thing to spread. It crept into minds, turning strength into hesitation, courage into doubt. If she let it take root here, they were already lost. She turned to the soldiers, their faces worn, waiting for orders. "Then we take it back," she said, her voice steady. "We fight, not just to hold the line, but to push forward. They think we are broken. Let's show them how wrong they are." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Some nodded. Others still looked uncertain. The strategist stepped forward then, his voice carrying through the air like a blade. "Do you hear her?" he asked the soldiers. "She does not speak in fear. She does not wait for others to decide her fate. She leads. If you want to live under a ruler who hides behind walls, then turn back now. But if you want to fight for something greater, then follow her." That was all it took. The shift was almost immediate. Swords were lifted, men straightened their backs, the weight of despair replaced by something sharper purpose. She met the strategist's gaze for only a moment before turning back to the soldiers. "We ride before nightfall," she said, "and we do not stop until the valley is ours." As the army moved, a sense of inevitability settled over her. This was not just a battle. It was a reckoning. And when it was over, nothing would ever be the same. The army rode through the night, torches flickering in the cold wind. The valley loomed ahead, shrouded in mist, its silence more unsettling than the sounds of battle. She could feel it, the weight of something unseen, something waiting. The strategist rode beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge. "There's no movement," he murmured. "It's too quiet." She had sensed it too. The enemy had moved too quickly, taken too much ground with ease. It didn't make sense for them to stop now. Either they were lying in wait, or something had shifted in their plan. A scout galloped toward them, breathless. "We found something," he said, voice tight. "You need to see it." She dismounted, following him through the rocky path. The soldiers ahead stood in grim silence, parting as she approached. And then she saw it. A flag, her empire's banner, half buried in the dirt. Blood stained the fabric, but it wasn't from a fallen soldier. It was painted onto the cloth in thick, deliberate strokes. A symbol, a warning, and beside it, a helmet she recognized instantly. Her breath caught. It belonged to him, the one who had left, the one she had fought to stand beside, only to be abandoned. The strategist picked up the helmet, turning it over in his hands. "This is not a coincidence," he said quietly. "They want you to see this." She clenched her fists. Where did they find it? The scout hesitated. Near the riverbank. There were tracks leading south. South, away from the battlefront. Away from everything. A knot formed in her chest. If he was still alive, then where had he gone? And why? The strategist studied her carefully. If he was taken, they would have made it known. If he was killed, they would have paraded his body through the capital. He paused. This is something else. She exhaled sharply. It doesn't change what we came here to do, doesn't it? He tilted his head. If he is alive, if he left something behind for you to find, then you have a choice to make. The army could not wait. The valley still needed to be reclaimed, the capital still at risk. But this was personal. She looked at the blood-streaked banner, at the helmet that should not have been here. The enemy had not just prepared for war, they had prepared for her. And that meant the real battle was only beginning. The moment she gave the order, the army surged forward, cutting through the valley like a storm. The enemy had prepared their traps, their ambushes, but they had underestimated her. Every battle before this had shaped her, hardened her, until hesitation was no longer part of her nature. She led from the front, her sword clashing against steel, the roar of war filling the night. The strategist stayed close, his mind working as fast as her blade. He had warned her of deception, and now she saw it unfolding. The enemy was not just defending the valley, they were stalling, holding her forces here while something larger moved beyond their sight. And then, as if the answer had been waiting just beyond the fog of war, the final piece fell into place. A second army. Not foreign invaders, but her own people's soldiers wearing the banners of her empire, marching under the orders of the council. They had come not to fight the enemy, but to remove her from the throne. Betrayal had always been a possibility, but to see it unfold in the midst of battle sent a new kind of rage through her. The council had never planned to save the empire. They had waited for her to weaken, to bleed in this war, and now they were here to finish what they had started. She turned to the strategist. "How long have they been moving?" His expression was unreadable, but his answer came without hesitation. "Long enough that they think victory is certain." 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. If she turned to fight the council's forces, the enemy at the valley's edge would regroup, and the war would spiral out of her control. If she kept pushing forward, she would be caught between two armies, crushed from both sides. And then a voice cut through the chaos, a voice she had not heard in what felt like a lifetime. "Stand down." The battlefield seemed to freeze, soldiers shifting uneasily, looking toward the ridge. And there he was. The one she had thought lost. The one whose helmet had been left behind as a message. He rode at the head of the council's forces, but his sword was not drawn. His expression was calm, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. The strategist exhaled, barely audible. Now it makes sense. She felt the weight of every moment leading to this. Every choice, every betrayal, every battle. It had all been leading here. The war was no longer just about the empire. It was about what she was willing to do to keep it. And as she looked at the man she had once risked everything for, she knew one thing with certainty: this was not over yet. The battlefield remained eerily silent, the tension between the two forces stretching thin like a rope about to snap. The wind carried the scent of blood and smoke, but all eyes were locked on him, the man she had once risked everything for, now standing with those who sought to erase her. She didn't let her emotions show. Not the confusion, not the ache of betrayal trying to surface. She kept her voice steady. So this is where you stand. He met her gaze, unwavering. You think this is simple? The strategist beside her exhaled, shaking his head slightly, but he remained silent. He knew this was a moment that only she could navigate. Her grip tightened on her sword. It looks simple enough. You return from the dead, leading the army sent to kill me. Am I supposed to believe there's a reason that makes this right? He took a slow step forward. I was never dead. I was taken. Held until I saw what the council truly planned. His voice was firm, but not cold. They never wanted to win this war. They wanted to let it burn, weaken the borders, make the empire desperate. Then they would step in as saviors, claiming they had no choice but to remove you for the good of the people. A murmur rippled through her soldiers. The council's deception had been suspected, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of anger through the ranks. Her pulse pounded. And yet, here you are, standing with them. I had no choice, he admitted. If I hadn't, they would have sent someone else. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to kill you. He looked around at the battlefield, at the men and women who had followed her through fire. I stood with them so I could stop this before it was too late. The strategist finally spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. And what is your plan now? To ask for trust? To expect us to stand down? The man she had once loved did not waver. No, I'm asking you to listen. She hated how much she still wanted to believe him. But belief had cost her before. The council had betrayed her, had tried to strip her of everything, and now they had sent him to deliver their final blow. Even if his words were true, even if his intentions had been real, how could she be sure? The enemy forces on the other side of the valley were waiting, watching. They would not hold back forever. Neither would the council's army. A decision had to be made. She looked at her soldiers, at the faces that had fought beside her, trusted her. They deserved a ruler who was not afraid to act. Her voice was calm but final. If you truly stand with us, then prove it. Without breaking eye contact, she tossed her sword toward him. It landed in the dirt between them. A test. A challenge. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he bent down and picked it up. His grip firmed around the hilt, and he turned away from the council's forces, toward the valley where the enemy army waited. A signal. A choice. The council's soldiers hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Their leader had just turned his back on them. If they fought now, they would not only be fighting her, they would be fighting him as well. The silence stretched. Then, one by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. She exhaled, but there was no relief yet. The war was not over. The valley still had to be taken. The council still had to answer for what they had done. But in this moment, she had won something greater. She had proven that strength was not just in battle, but in the choices made when everything was at stake. And when the final fight came, she knew she would not stand alone.